What would you do if someone you once loved became someone you feared? What if the law promised to protect you, but that promise turned out to be worthless when it mattered most? 21 years old, the age when life truly begins, when you can make your own decisions, celebrate your independence, look toward a future full of possibilities. For one young woman, her 21st birthday was supposed to mark the start of her adult life. Instead, it marked the end of her life entirely. We've investigated a recent case that exposes the terrifying reality of how quickly celebration can turn to terror, how easily manipulation can masquerade as affection, and how a single phone call can become someone's final words. This story will make you question everything you think you know about protection orders, about trusting your instincts, and about the people we choose to love. Our research centers around a woman who thought she had done everything right. She recognized danger early, she took legal action, she sought protection through official channels, she had court documents with criminal penalties attached, designed specifically to keep one person away from her. Yet on what should have been the happiest day of her young adult life, all of those safeguards meant nothing. The case begins with a phone call. A seemingly innocent FaceTime conversation between cousins, discussing birthday plans that would soon become something far more sinister. What started as casual family chatter about meeting someone for a birthday present would evolve into something that still haunts everyone who heard it. Technology plays a crucial role in this story, not just in how investigators eventually solved the case, but in how the events unfolded in real time. Someone was listening. Someone was watching through a screen as the situation escalated from suspicious to dangerous to deadly. That digital witness would later provide testimony that painted a complete picture of manipulation, fear, and desperation. We discovered that the perpetrator had been communicating through social media, leaving a trail of messages that revealed their true intentions. They spoke of love, of second chances, of birthday surprises, but beneath those words lay something much darker: a refusal to accept rejection, an obsession with control, and a willingness to exploit special occasions for personal gain. The location where everything culminated tells its own story. West 37th Street and Pennsylvania Avenue in Kansas City, an area where neighbors know each other, where people walk their dogs and live their daily lives. On this particular Tuesday evening, those neighbors became unwilling witnesses to something that would change their community forever. What they heard still echoes in our research. Multiple gunshots piercing the evening air, followed by desperate screaming. A woman's voice, pleading for mercy that would never come. Then more gunshots. Then the sound of a vehicle speeding away into the night, leaving behind a scene that first responders were already too late to change. The investigation that followed moved with remarkable speed, aided by modern surveillance technology and digital evidence that the perpetrator never realized they were creating. Security cameras captured crucial footage. Cell phone records told their own story. Social media posts became evidence. Text messages revealed the timeline of manipulation and deceit. But perhaps the most powerful evidence came from that cousin who had been connected through FaceTime during the crucial hours. Their testimony would later reveal the calculated nature of the trap, the escalating fear, and the broken promise that a follow-up call would come later, a call that would never happen. The legal documents tell part of this story, a temporary order of protection filed with hope that the legal system could create the safety that personal boundaries had failed to establish. The irony is devastating. The very person this order was meant to keep away became the one who violated it in the most permanent way possible. Our research into this case forced us to examine uncomfortable questions about domestic violence, about the limitations of legal protection, and about the warning signs that too often go unheeded. This young woman's story represents thousands of others who have sought help from the system, only to discover that sometimes determination to harm overpowers determination to protect. As we pieced together the timeline of that Tuesday evening, what emerged was a story of manipulation so calculated, violence so sudden, and loss so preventable that it demands to be told. The birthday that should have celebrated life instead became a reminder of how quickly everything can change when someone refuses to accept the word no. Before we continue deeper into this case, we want you to think about this. How many red flags would it take for you to seek legal protection from someone you once loved? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to Crime Vault Stories, because we uncover the cases that matter, the stories that need to be told. Her name was Layla Freeman. 21 years old on May 13, 2025. A young woman whose life held all the promise that comes with entering true adulthood. But our investigation reveals that behind this milestone birthday lay a relationship that had already transformed from love into something far more dangerous. We found that Layla had recently made one of the most difficult decisions a person can make. She had legally declared that someone she once cared about now posed a threat to her safety. The temporary order of protection she filed wasn't a casual decision or an overreaction. This type of legal document carries serious criminal penalties for violation, and courts don't issue them without compelling evidence of genuine danger. To understand why this protection order ultimately failed to save her life, we need to examine what these legal documents actually represent, and more importantly, what they cannot do. A temporary order of protection is essentially a piece of paper that says, "Stay away." It creates legal consequences for contact, but it cannot create physical barriers. It relies entirely on the assumption that the person it targets will respect both the law and the court's authority. Our research into domestic violence cases reveals a troubling pattern. Protection orders work best against people who are already inclined to follow rules and respect boundaries. They are least effective against individuals who view their former partner as property, rather than as a person with rights. When someone believes they have ownership over another human being, a court order becomes just another obstacle to overcome, rather than a boundary to respect. The man at the center of this case had been communicating with Layla through social media, leaving behind a digital trail that investigators would later use to reconstruct his mindset. His Facebook messages spoke of wanting to profess his love. Language that might sound romantic to someone unfamiliar with the dynamics of controlling relationships, but which experts recognize as a common pattern among individuals who refuse to accept rejection. What we discovered in our analysis of these communications reveals the classic hallmarks of someone who had never truly accepted that the relationship was over. The messages weren't just about love, they were about possession, about his belief that he had the right to her attention, her time, and her presence, regardless of her own wishes or legal boundaries. The psychology behind this type of behavior helps explain why protection orders so often fail to prevent violence. For many perpetrators of intimate partner violence, the legal system represents just another form of interference in what they view as their personal relationship. The order doesn't make them realize they were wrong. It makes them angry that someone else is now controlling their access to their victim. Our investigation found that Layla had recognized these danger signals early enough to take legal action, but the warning signs had likely been building for much longer. The decision to file for protection doesn't happen overnight. It represents the culmination of incidents, threats, or behaviors that made her feel unsafe enough to involve the court system. What makes this case particularly tragic is that Layla appeared to understand the nature of the threat she faced. She didn't just hope the situation would improve or try to handle it privately. She used the legal tools available to her, documented her concerns officially, and created a paper trail that should have provided both protection and accountability. But our research into similar cases across the country reveals a stark reality. Protection orders are most effective as evidence after a crime has already been committed, rather than as prevention before it happens. They create legal consequences for violations, but those consequences only matter to people who fear legal repercussions more than they desire control over their former partner. The relationship dynamics we uncovered through court records and digital evidence paint a picture of someone who had never learned to respect boundaries, who viewed rejection as a challenge rather than a decision to accept. His continued attempts to contact Layla, despite the legal order, suggest someone operating under the belief that persistence would eventually overcome her resistance. This pattern, the refusal to accept no as a final answer, represents one of the most dangerous aspects of intimate partner violence. When someone becomes convinced that their former partner belongs to them, legal documents become obstacles to navigate rather than boundaries to respect. The protection order that was meant to keep him away instead became something he needed to work around. Our examination of the timeline leading up to May 13th reveals that he had been planning something for her birthday. The birthday present he would later use to lure her wasn't a spontaneous gesture. It was a calculated exploitation of a day that should have represented celebration and joy. He understood exactly how to manipulate her emotions, how to use her special day as the very weapon to draw her into danger. The stage was set for a tragedy that legal documents alone could never prevent. Layla had done everything the system asked of her, but the system had no answer for someone determined to violate both the law and her fundamental right to safety. Tuesday, May 13th, 2025, 6:30 in the evening. Layla Freeman picked up her phone and made what would become one of the most crucial pieces of evidence in her own murder case, a FaceTime call to her cousin that seemed completely ordinary at the time. Our reconstruction of this conversation reveals how expertly predators can manipulate even the most cautious victims. Layla explained to her cousin that her ex-boyfriend, the same person she had a court order against, had reached out about giving her a birthday present. She seemed cautiously optimistic, perhaps even touched that he wanted to acknowledge her special day despite their complicated history. What Layla couldn't see, and what her cousin couldn't warn her about, was the trap being laid through this seemingly thoughtful gesture. The man who had been forbidden from contacting her had found the perfect emotional leverage: her birthday. He understood that birthdays carry special significance, that they represent hope, celebration, and the kind of positive memories that can make someone temporarily lower their guard. The timing of his approach wasn't accidental. May 13th represented a psychological opportunity, a day when Layla might be more inclined to believe in second chances, more willing to think that perhaps he had changed, more open to the possibility that he genuinely wanted to celebrate her milestone rather than harm her. Birthdays make us want to believe in the good intentions of others, even from people we've learned to fear. During that initial 6:30 p.m. call, Layla's voice carried none of the tension that would mark their next conversation. Her cousin later described her as sounding normal, maybe even slightly hopeful. She mentioned meeting him, but didn't express any particular concern or fear. The protection order existed, but somehow this birthday present seemed to exist outside of those legal boundaries in her mind. What we discovered through our investigation is how this manipulation tactic exploits a psychological vulnerability that even the most street-smart people possess. Special occasions, birthdays, holidays, anniversaries, create emotional openings that skilled manipulators know how to exploit. They understand that these dates carry enough sentimental weight to make their victims question whether they're being too harsh, too unforgiving, too suspicious. The hour and a half between that first call and the second represents a gap in time that investigators would later try to reconstruct through digital evidence and witness statements. We know Layla met him somewhere during this window. We know that whatever happened during their encounter fundamentally changed the dynamic between them. And we know that by 8 p.m., everything had shifted. When Layla's cousin called back around 8 p.m., the woman who answered bore little resemblance to the person they had spoken to 90 minutes earlier. The cousin immediately noticed that Layla was crying, not just upset, but actively distressed in a way that set off every alarm bell a family member can experience. "I'm still with him," Layla managed to say through her tears. Those 4 words carried a weight that her cousin understood immediately. This wasn't a casual update about extended birthday plans. This was a cry for help disguised as information. The fact that she felt the need to specify that she was still with him suggested that even she understood this situation had gone on longer than it should have. The promise she made next, that she would call back later, would haunt her cousin forever. It was the kind of reassurance that people give when they're trying to convince themselves, as much as others, that everything will be okay. Her cousin sensed something was wrong, but had no way to intervene from a distance, no way to reach through the phone screen and extract Layla from whatever situation she had found herself in. What makes this conversation particularly heartbreaking is how it captures the moment when a victim realizes they've made a mistake, but feels trapped by the circumstances they've walked into. Layla's distress wasn't just about whatever had happened during their meeting. It was about the growing recognition that the birthday present had been a lie, that she had been manipulated into vulnerability, and that the protection order she had filed meant nothing to someone determined to violate it. The cousin's decision to wait for that return call, rather than immediately contacting authorities, reflects a natural human response to an unclear situation. How do you call 911 because your cousin sounded upset on a phone call? How do you explain that something felt wrong without concrete evidence of danger? These are the impossible decisions that family members face when they sense threat, but can't articulate exactly what kind of help is needed. As the evening wore on and that promised return call never came, Layla's cousin experienced the slow-building dread that comes with knowing something is terribly wrong, but being powerless to act. Phone calls that go straight to voicemail, text messages that remain unread, the growing certainty that the last conversation they had shared would indeed be their last. What neither Layla nor her cousin understood during that 8 p.m. call was that they were already past the point of no return. The birthday present had served its purpose. It had gotten Layla alone with someone who had no intention of letting her leave. The tears her cousin heard weren't just distress. They were the sound of someone beginning to understand that they had walked into their own death trap. The silence that followed that phone call would stretch on for hours, broken only by the sound of gunshots that neighbors would later report hearing just before 10 p.m. As we piece together Layla's final hours, we can't help but wonder, what would you have done if you were her cousin receiving these calls? The red flags were there, but hindsight is always clearer. Share this video with someone who needs to hear Layla's story, because awareness can save lives. 10 p.m. West 37th Street and Pennsylvania Avenue, Kansas City. The neighbors who called 911 that night didn't expect to become witnesses to murder. The first gunshots rang out just before 10 p.m. Multiple shots fired in rapid succession. Then screaming. A woman's voice, desperate and pleading, "Please don't, no please." Then more gunshots, then silence. Rashid Turner had finally shown Layla Freeman what her birthday present really was. The witness accounts we obtained paint a terrifying picture of those final moments. Residents in the area heard the initial gunfire and looked outside to see what was happening. What they witnessed was Layla, 21 years old on her birthday, being shot multiple times near a parked Chevrolet Malibu. But Turner wasn't finished. As Layla lay dying in the street, begging for her life, he fired again. The witnesses heard her final words, a desperate plea for mercy that would never come. "Please don't. No, please." Those 5 words represent the last thing Layla Freeman ever said, captured by neighbors who were powerless to stop what they were seeing. After the shooting stopped, witnesses watched Turner calmly exit the Chevrolet Malibu and walk to a Ford Mustang parked nearby. No panic, no apparent emotion. He simply got in his car and drove away, leaving Layla's body in the street like discarded trash. The 911 calls started flooding in immediately. Shots fired. Someone's down. A woman was screaming. The Kansas City Police Department dispatched officers to the scene, but everyone involved already knew they would be too late. This wasn't a rescue mission. It was a body recovery. When first responders arrived, they found Layla exactly where the witnesses had described. Multiple gunshot wounds, no pulse. The young woman who had been celebrating her 21st birthday just hours earlier was declared dead at the scene, her blood staining the asphalt near 37th and Pennsylvania. The Chevrolet Malibu told its own story. This wasn't a random encounter or a crime of passion that escalated unexpectedly. Turner had planned this. He had lured Layla to this specific location in this specific vehicle with the full intention of killing her. The birthday present had been a death trap from the beginning. What makes this scene particularly disturbing is the calculated nature of Turner's escape. He didn't flee in panic or confusion. He methodically moved from the Malibu to the Mustang, suggesting he had planned not just the murder, but his getaway route. This wasn't someone who snapped in a moment of rage. This was someone who had thought through every detail of how to kill his ex-girlfriend and get away with it. The witnesses who saw Turner leave the scene would later provide crucial testimony, but their accounts also reveal the psychological trauma that mass violence inflicts on entire communities. These weren't people who had chosen to witness a murder. They were ordinary residents whose evening was shattered by the sound of gunshots and screaming. Our investigation found that several neighbors had been outside when the shooting began. Some were walking dogs, others were returning home from work. A few were simply enjoying the evening air. None of them expected to become witnesses to intimate partner violence, played out with deadly force on their own street. The location itself, West 37th and Pennsylvania, represents the kind of neighborhood where people know each other, where children play outside, where families feel safe walking after dark. Turner's decision to commit murder in this setting shows his complete disregard not just for Layla's life, but for the safety and peace of mind of an entire community. The physical evidence left behind painted a clear picture for investigators. Shell casings marked where Turner had stood while firing. Blood evidence showed where Layla had fallen and tried to move. The positioning of the vehicles indicated this had been a planned execution, not a spontaneous argument that turned violent. But perhaps the most damning evidence was the simplest. Turner had violated every aspect of the protection order Layla had filed against him. He had contacted her. He had convinced her to meet him. He had brought her to a location where no one could intervene. And then he had killed her. The first responders who worked the scene that night have seen their share of domestic violence cases, but even experienced officers were struck by the brutality of what had happened. This wasn't just murder. It was the systematic destruction of a young woman who had tried to protect herself through legal means and discovered that some people consider court orders to be meaningless pieces of paper. The crime scene processing would take hours, but the basic facts were immediately clear. Layla Freeman, 21 years old, had been murdered by her ex-boyfriend in violation of a protection order. Rashid Turner had used her birthday as bait, lured her to an isolated location, and executed her while she begged for her life. By the time investigators finished documenting the scene, Turner was long gone. But he had made a critical error. He assumed that killing Layla would be the end of the story. What he didn't count on was how much evidence he had left behind, both at the crime scene and in the digital world. He had been careless enough to navigate without understanding that everything leaves a trace. The manhunt for Rashid Turner was about to begin, and the digital evidence he had scattered would lead investigators straight to him. Rashid Turner thought he was smart. He thought killing Layla would end the story. He was wrong. Within hours of discovering Layla's body, Kansas City detectives had already begun assembling the digital evidence that would destroy Turner's freedom forever. Modern murderers leave electronic fingerprints everywhere they go, and Turner had been sloppy enough to create a trail that led directly back to him. The investigation moved with remarkable speed because Turner had essentially documented his own crime. His Facebook account contained photos of himself with a blue Ford Mustang, the exact vehicle witnesses had seen fleeing the murder scene. His social media messages to Layla, including his requests to profess his love, provided clear evidence of his obsession and his refusal to respect the protection order. But the digital evidence went far beyond social media. Text messages between Turner and Layla revealed the timeline of manipulation that led to her death. These communications showed how he had convinced her to meet him, how he had used her birthday as emotional leverage, and how he had planned the encounter that would cost her life. The city's surveillance camera network proved to be Turner's downfall. Multiple cameras had captured his Ford Mustang in the vicinity of West 37th and Pennsylvania Avenue around the time of the murder. The footage provided investigators with a clear timeline of his movements, confirming witness accounts and placing him at the scene during the critical window when Layla was killed. Perhaps most damning was the testimony from Layla's cousin about those final FaceTime calls. The cousin's account provided investigators with a real-time narrative of Turner's manipulation tactics and Layla's growing distress. This wasn't just circumstantial evidence. This was a first-hand witness to the emotional escalation that preceded the murder. The protection order Layla had filed against Turner became a crucial piece of the prosecution's case. This legal document proved that Turner knew he was forbidden from contacting Layla, making his approach about the birthday present a deliberate violation of court orders. It also established a pattern of threatening behavior that had escalated to murder. Turner's arrest came swiftly once investigators had assembled this evidence. The combination of digital communications, witness testimony, camera footage, and physical evidence from the crime scene created an overwhelming case against him. There was no question about his guilt. The only question was what charges he would face. The Jackson County Prosecutor's Office filed 2 charges against Rashid Turner: second-degree murder and armed criminal action. These charges reflect the severity of his crime while acknowledging the premeditated nature of his actions. The armed criminal action charge specifically addresses his use of a firearm during the commission of a felony. Turner is currently being held without bond in the Jackson County Detention Center, a status that reflects both the strength of the evidence against him and the court's assessment that he poses a significant danger to the community. The decision to deny bond also indicates that the court considers him a substantial flight risk, given the overwhelming evidence of his guilt. The legal proceedings are still in their early stages, but the prosecution appears to have built an airtight case. The combination of digital evidence, witness testimony, physical evidence from the crime scene, and Turner's clear violation of the protection order creates multiple layers of proof that will be difficult for any defense attorney to challenge. What makes this case particularly significant is how it demonstrates the evolution of criminal investigations in the digital age. Turner's own communications, social media posts, and digital footprints provided investigators with more evidence than they needed to secure his conviction. His attempt to use technology to manipulate Layla ultimately became the very tool that ensured his capture. The case also highlights the tragic reality that protection orders, while legally powerful, cannot prevent determined killers from committing violence. Layla did everything right. She recognized the danger, sought legal protection, and tried to maintain boundaries. But Turner's willingness to violate court orders and commit murder rendered those protections meaningless. As Turner awaits trial, Layla's family continues to grieve the loss of a young woman whose life was cut short by someone who believed he owned her. The legal system will ultimately deliver justice for her murder, but no verdict can restore the future that was stolen from her on what should have been one of the happiest days of her life. Layla's story doesn't end with her death. It continues with every person who learns from her tragedy. We've spent countless hours researching this case because at Crime Vault Stories, we believe every victim deserves to have their story told with respect and accuracy. If this case moved you, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because we're committed to bringing you the true crime stories that matter most. And remember, if you or someone you know is in danger, don't wait. Seek help immediately.